Good morning, my dear friends. Today we are learning chapter 11 in the laws of prayer. Over here, the Rambam is going to be discussing the specialty of the holiness of a synagogue, of a house of prayer. And the Rambam begins off by telling us that any place where there are 10 Jewish people living in a city, in a town, in a village, this is a place where they must create a synagogue, a place where they can all congregate together and serve God from that place. So they have to build a synagogue, get a Torah, and essentially be able to come and pray together. And when they build that synagogue, it should be in a high part of the town or the city. It shouldn't be in a deep valley, but rather high up, as we find that the temple, the Bet HaMikdash, was also built high up on a mountain, and so that it should be higher than the rest of the other houses in the city. As we find in the verse, it says, to lift up the house of our God. And the entrance to the synagogue should be from the east. And as we find in regards to the tabernacle in the miniature temple that was in the desert, that the entrance was on the east, as well as the temple itself, the Bet HaMikdash, also the entrance to it was on the east side. And when we build the ark, we should also put it on the east side, or whichever way we're praying. It's so that when we pray, we should be facing the ark, where the Torah is stored. And then in the middle of the synagogue, in the middle of the sanctuary, we put what is called the bima. The bima is like a big high table, which is used first of all so that when the leader who is leading the prayer is able to stand there, or someone is giving a talk, arousing the congregation, telling them words of wisdom, they should have a place where they are able to stand. And so to also when they are reading the Torah, so then as well they can also read it on that table. And this is the order of how the synagogue is supposed to be set up. So you have up on front, on the east wall, if we're outside of Israel and we're all praying over here from the western part of the world, we're praying towards east, towards Jerusalem, and we face towards east, and we have the ark where the Torah is stored up front, and we have the elders of the community sitting up front as well. And then we have all the other people sitting row by row, facing towards the front. And you have the one that is leading the prayer as well up on front, and when we read the Torah, so then it's going to be in the center of the room. So, in general, the Rambam says that the holiness of a synagogue or a place of worship, of study, is extremely special, and it's a very holy place. And therefore we have to clean them and make sure that they are nice, and they would light special candles to have the place lit up. And back in the day, in Spain or Babylonia or in Israel, so they would have special mats that they would put on the floor that everyone is able to sit them. And the Rambam says, but in the European communities, they would sit on chairs. But in Spain, where he was from, they would sit on mats on the floor. And when we come to a shul, when we come to a synagogue, we should not be jesty or making jokes and lightheaded. It's not a place to eat and drink, or to just be walking around and using it for our own comfort, but rather it's a place of holiness, and therefore we should be giving it the proper honor. And but if it's a special occasion, if it's the great rabbis who are sitting and they're having a special, if it's a mitzvah to be eating, so then that is allowed to be done inside the synagogue. I mean, in general, we find that if it's a coming together for a purpose of a mitzvah, for instance, on Shabbat we make it a kiddush, so that can be done inside the shul. But in general, it's not just a place to come and eat a sandwich, but rather go do it in the outside room and so on. And as well, it's also a person shouldn't be doing their accountancy, seeing how much money has come in, what's going out, and so on, unless it's for a mitzvah as well. For instance, if someone is for charity or so on and so forth. And even in a eulogy, which is a very proper thing to do. But even that, only for a great community leader should that be done inside the synagogue. And in general, eulogies should be done elsewhere. Now, what about if a person has to go into the synagogue or into a house of worship and to call someone? He's not actually going in there to pray or to study. He just wants to go in there to call his friend, his child, etc. So, or to just take something, pick up a book. So whenever we go inside, we should always say a verse of Torah or do a small prayer or just be there for a little bit as a sign of honor. And a person in general, when we go into the shul, when we go into the synagogue, we're allowed to go with our stick or with our shoes. It's not like we have to take off our shoes. In the temple, that was an extra holiness, so a person wasn't allowed to go with their various personal items, money, purses, so on. But in a synagogue, it's allowed. And the holiness of a synagogue is so great that even if it has been destroyed, it fell down, it fell apart, it still remains holy, and we still have to give it the proper care. And if there was grass or plants, trees growing around, we should clear it out so that hopefully we will rebuild it. And if we want to build a new synagogue, Rambam says a very interesting law. We shouldn't first knock down the old one and build the new one afterwards, because maybe we never know what can happen. Maybe we'll run out of funds. Maybe we can't know what will be. And maybe the new synagogue will never be built, and the old one is already taken down, demolished. So therefore, first build the new one, and only then take down the old one. And unless it's a very dangerous situation where the building is about to collapse, the old one, so then, of course, we should take it down. But we should really get very, very involved in immediately rebuilding a new synagogue, and we should work on it by day and by night without stopping, so that we should make sure that it should be built, and less times become difficult, and it might remain destroyed, which will be a very bad thing. And so that's the idea of the holiness of a synagogue. Now, when we're talking about holiness in general, there are various levels in holiness. So, for instance, we already discussed, we mentioned that the level of holiness of a house of prayer, a synagogue per se, is less holy than a place where there is prayer and study as well. So we have what is called a synagogue. Then we also have a place of study where there is also study being done, and obviously also prayers. And the place of study is actually greater in its holiness than a place where there's only prayer. So if you have a place which is only a synagogue per se, that is allowed to become a place of study because we're going up. So we always want to go up in holiness. So if it's a synagogue, it can become also a place of study. But if it started off as a place of study, we shouldn't downgrade to only make it into a place where there is only prayers, because we always want to go up and elevate ourselves in holiness, not going down. Similarly, if you have a Torah scroll, which if there is and it's being sold for whatever reason, so the money of the Torah scroll shouldn't go to buy tablecloths for the synagogue, because although tablecloths are very important, but the holiness of a Torah is so great, we should only buy another Torah with it. Similarly, also, if they're collecting money, there was a big campaign, fundraiser for the synagogue, whatever the money was directed for and had been originally collected for, that's where the money should go for. Unless they made a certain condition that they are able to use it for whatever is needed, so then that would be okay. Now, the Rambam says a very interesting thing. When we're talking about selling a synagogue, in other words, if for whatever reason they decided they're selling the old place, maybe they're buying a new one, so that would only be applicable to be able to sell in a case where we're talking about a small town or a village, where the synagogue was created based on the on the people of the town. So all the people came together and decided, we need a place where we can pray, where we can study. Let's do it over here. Now, but if we're talking about a metropolitan city, a big city, if we're talking Pensacola versus New York, so we have a small town versus a big city. So if you have a big city, metropolitan place, where you have people from across the whole world, it's a cross city, and everyone's coming through it. So now when you have this synagogue and it's being built with people from across the whole world in mind, well now, essentially, it was created as a synagogue by everyone across the world. So therefore, everyone put together to make this synagogue, and now you would need to have the permission from all the Jews across the world to be able to sell it, and that's not possible. So therefore, in a town, you're able to sell the synagogue if everyone decides that we should sell it. But if we're talking about a big city, so then they should not sell that synagogue. And even when a synagogue is sold, it shouldn't be made into a bathhouse and so on, or a place where they work leather, which is something which is degrading for a synagogue, unless they had special permission from the leaders of the community as a special case. So then that would be allowed. And similarly, in general, whenever you have the people of the community, they decide that a certain individual should be the leader of the community, so then he would have the jurisdiction and be the emissary of the people of the community to decide what should be done as he sees fit. And then the Rambam continues to say that the same way we're able to sell a synagogue in certain situations, so to also you're allowed to give it as a gift. And so to also various parts, even if you're taking apart a building, it's being demolished, but you're taking the wood and the bricks and so on, and you're able to gift them. Again, it should be done in a way of honor and as befitting for the particles of the synagogue. And now comes the last law for today's chapter. Is a very interesting law, which is very timely, because over here the Rambam discusses an idea where we have people praying on the street, outdoors. So sometimes we have an outdoor service, which is actually what we're going to be having tonight in honor of Yom Kippur. We're going to be having an outdoor service out in the lot, in the back, but again, it's not a permanent synagogue. So the Rambam says, although it's being used for services, or sometimes you have a very, very large group of people coming together for a special service in the city square or something. So although it's being used for the service and for the time of prayer, but it's not a synagogue per se, unless you decide this is going to be the new synagogue. But if it's only being used as a place for service, or similarly also, for instance, if there is prayers taking place in someone's private home, maybe like a Shiva house, so everyone comes together to pray over there in the time of the Shiva, when after a person has passed away, we come to pay our condolences to that person. So in such a case, it doesn't get the holiness of a synagogue per se, because it's only being used as a one-off, so to speak. So it's only used at that time, and then after that, it goes back to its original state as being something which is just regular, and it can be used for whatever it is. And that is the chapter for today, my friends, where we have learned all about the specialty of the holiness of a synagogue, and what is the proper way of caring for it and making sure that it should get the proper honor. With that, we have completed the chapter for today. We will be in touch.